doctors, occult magicians, and more. But the evidence of this Arctic Nazi exodus following the war is even more compelling when we factor in Operation High Jump. Roughly a year after World War II ended, the U.S. Navy mounted a massive mission to Antarctica, and seemingly a continuation of the war with the Nazis. Admiral Richard E. Byrd led 4,000 military troops from the United States, Britain, and Australia in this Arctic invasion deemed Operation High Jump. They were led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd's command ship, a large fleet of other warships, as well as crafts, machines, and tools for war. So we're dealing with a major invasion of ships set to war in the Arctic. But it's important to note here that this was not exactly the official story that was being sold to the public at the time. The public was told that this was an exploration mission.
They got Admiral Byrd. He was the only expert in that area during that time that had already been on different expeditions to the Arctic and also his knowledge of the Antarctic. So they sent him down there with 13 ships. Now, if this is a scientific investigation, you look at all the ships, there was not one special built scientific ship, laboratory ship, or anything. There was an aircraft carrier, there were several submarines, there was over 4,000 military men. This was a joint military attack or venture.
In 1947, under Admiral Byrd's direction, there was a flotilla of 13 ships sent to challenge the Nazis and their underground citadel in a place called New Schwabenland.
But here's where the story gets interesting. The USS Pine Island was one of the ships that were part of the fleet. This ship was removed from the Naval Register on an unknown date. The ship's final disposition is still unknown. Now, how does one go about losing a major surface ship, over 640 feet long, almost 70 feet wide, with a displacement of over 15,000 tons? The story, of course, gets stranger. The Pine Island is not the only ship involved in Antarctic research to have disappeared. There were numerous others. So what happened to the ships that went missing during Operation High Jump? These questions seem quickly answered by investigating the personal stories of what took place off the record. There were major battles taking place there, with stories that included UFOs coming up out of the earth and even out of the Arctic waters that were equipped with advanced weaponry that shot energy beams, cutting right through the ships and planes. It was a technology that the armies of the world were not familiar with, and sources claim that this alien technology quickly overpowered the American co-forces that had initiated this war. This was an incredibly unexpected outcome, to say the least.
Admiral Byrd is getting our plane shot down by Nazi flying saucers.
Now, a Chilean newspaper claims that they had ship-to-shore contact with Admiral Byrd, who claimed at the time that in the future they would have to contend with aircraft that could go from pole to pole. My claim and all the evidence, and not so much what is being said, but what wasn't said, was that they had a battle of some sort with the last bastion of Nazis on Base 211, and they got their butts kicked.
These are the claims that have surfaced in the aftermath of Operation High Jump, which would sensibly explain why the operation was brought to a short ending.
As soon as they got home, Admiral Byrd was taken to Washington. He was told to be quiet. He was a dutiful soldier and stayed quiet and never said anything more. In that time, he started pushing Washington to start to use the Antarctic to test nuclear bombs. Why? Because he knew there was something there that needed to be nuked. And what better way, a cover story, to do that? Actually, in 1952, 2 months before a bill was finally going to be submitted to Congress to consider this, all of a sudden the famous, and you can see a nice colored picture of it, the famous flyby of a series of UFOs in formation flying over Washington, D.C. As soon as they were seen, the jets were scrambled to confront them, and as soon as they did, the UFOs blinked out. As soon as the jets landed back at the airbase, they're back right where they were before. They reappear. This happened 3 times. Now, what I noticed about it and flipped me out, because being a history nut, I saw it right away. There's 3 clusters of UFOs flying over the Capitol. And if you take a real detailed look, you'll see that there's a point man on one level and then two wingmen staggered. I'm going, oh my God. That's a typical Luftwaffe formation. These saucers are flying in a Luftwaffe formation. This is weird. Our own intelligence fully realized it and fully realized what was going on. Because the next thing you know, the bill is removed from Congress and no more further discussion about it.
The amount of cover-up, murder, Forrestal, James Forrestal, first Secretary of Defense, murdered, thrown out a third-story hospital window in Bethesda, Maryland, and he wanted to go and tell the people. He wanted to tell the people what they had found in the Antarctic.
Shortly after Operation High Jump had failed, Admiral Byrd is documented as taking a North Pole expedition. Now, it's probably a good idea to explain a little bit more about Admiral Byrd before going any further, as this next account is as mind-blowing as they come. Richard Evelyn Byrd was an American naval officer who specialized in feats of great exploration. He was a pioneering American aviator, he was a polar explorer, and he was an organizer of polar logistics. He served as a navigator and expedition leader on aircraft flights, in which he crossed the Atlantic Ocean, a segment of the Arctic Ocean, and even a segment of the Antarctic Plateau. Byrd claimed that his expeditions had been the first to reach the North and South Poles by air, and he was highly accredited and praised for these major accomplishments worldwide. It was in his lifetime that Byrd had amassed 22 citations and special commendations, including the Medal of Honor, which is the highest honor for heroism given by the United States. Byrd was one of only 4 Americans in history entitled to wear a medal with their own image on it. He was a national hero and explorer, awarded with notoriety even from the Smithsonian. Admiral Byrd was held to a high degree of respect in terms of the world, and he was highly regarded and valued by the U.S. government for a lifetime of accomplishments through expeditions and missions. Finally, he was on the cover of Time magazine, published on Monday, November 8, 1926, as well as 2 commemorative postage stamps. And his expeditions were publicized greatly in the media of his day.
Our guest tonight found out whether there was any land north of the North American continent. He made that first discovery flight, and I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our great living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily.
So what we have here is someone who isn't exactly a Johnny-come-lately. We're not talking about a questionable conspiracy theorist, but rather someone with a lifetime of adventures and documented stories of expeditions that we only hear about or see in the movies. That being stated, a diary has surfaced claiming to be that of Admiral Byrd, documenting one of the most amazing expeditions to date. We're dealing with a man who was taken into the North Pole by UFOs and was forced to meet with the Inner Earth King, or the Master, if we're going by the diary's own terminology. No one can state it better than the words of the diary itself.
Admiral Richard E. Byrd's diary, February, March 1947. The land beyond the poles. The exploration flight over the North Pole. The inner Earth. My secret diary. I must write this diary in secrecy and obscurity. It concerns my Arctic flight of the 19th day of February in the year of 1947. There comes a time when the rationality of men must fade into insignificance, and one must accept the inevitability of the truth. I am not at liberty to disclose the following documentation at this writing. Perhaps it shall never see the light of public scrutiny. But I must do my duty and record here for all to read one day. In a world of greed and exploitation of certain of mankind, one can no longer suppress that which is truth. Flight log, Base Camp, Arctic. February 19th, 1947. 0600 hours. All preparations are complete for our flight northward, and we are airborne with full fuel tanks at 0610 hours. 0910 hours. Vast ice and snow below. 0915 hours. In the distance is what appears to be mountains. 1000 hours. We are crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best it can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. 10:05 hours. I alter altitude to 1400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below us. It appears to be an elephant. No, it looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible, yet there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed. It is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. 10:30 hours. The external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Continuing on our heading now. Navigation instruments seem normal now. I am puzzled over their actions. Attempt to contact base camp. Radio is not functioning. 11:30 hours. Countryside below is more level and normal, if I may use that word. Ahead we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God! Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They're close enough now to see the markings on them. It is a type of swastika. This is fantastic. Where are we? What has happened? I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We are caught in an invisible vice grip of some type. 11:35 hours. Our radio crackles and a voice comes through in English, with what perhaps is a slight Nordic or Germanic accent. The message is, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral. You're in good hands." I note the engines of our plane have stopped running. The aircraft is under some strange control and is now turning itself. The controls are useless. 11:40 hours. Another radio message received. We begin the landing process now, and in moments the plane shudders slightly and begins a descent as though caught in some great unseen elevator. The downward motion is negligible, and we touch down with only a slight jolt. 11:45 hours. I am making a hasty last entry in the flight log. Several men are approaching on foot toward our aircraft. They are tall, with blonde hair. In the distance is a large shimmering city, pulsating with rainbow hues of color. I do not know what's going to happen now, but I see no signs of weapons on those approaching. I hear now a voice ordering me by name to open the cargo door. I comply. End log. From this point, I write all the following events here from memory. It defies the imagination. It would seem all but madness if it had not happened. The radio man and I are taken from the aircraft, and we are received in a most cordial manner. We were then boarded on a small platform-like conveyance with no wheels. It moves us toward the glowing city with great swiftness. As we approach, the city seems to be made of a crystal material. Soon, we arrive at a large building that is a type I have never seen before. It appears to be right out of the design board of Frank Lloyd Wright, or perhaps more correctly, out of a Buck Rogers setting. We are given some type of warm beverage which tasted like nothing I have ever savored before. It is delicious. After about 10 minutes, 2 of our wondrous appearing hosts come to our quarters and announce that I am to accompany them. I have no choice but to comply. I leave my radio man behind, and we walk a short distance and enter into what seems to be an elevator. We descend downward for some moments, and the machine stops, and the door lifts silently upward. We then proceed down a long hallway that is lit by rose-colored light that seems to be emanating from the very walls themselves. One of the beings motions for us to stop before a great door. Over the door is an inscription that I cannot read. The great door slides noiselessly open, and I am beckoned to enter. One of my hosts speaks. Have no fear, Admiral. You are to have an audience with the Master. I step inside, and my eyes adjust to the beautiful coloration that seems to be filling the room completely. Then I begin to see my surroundings. What greeted my eyes is the most beautiful sight of my entire existence. It is, in fact, too beautiful and wondrous to describe. It is exquisite and delicate. I do not think there exists a human term that can describe it in any detail with justice. My thoughts are interrupted in a cordial manner by a warm, rich voice of melodious quality. I bid you welcome to our domain, Admiral. I see a man with delicate features, and with the etching of years upon his face. He is seated at a long table. He motions me to sit down in one of the chairs. After I am seated, he places his fingertips together and smiles. He speaks softly again, and conveys the following. We have let you enter here because you are of noble character, and well known on the surface world. Surface world, I half gasp under my breath. Yes, the Master replies with a smile. You are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distance beyond. But now, Admiral, I shall tell you why you have been summoned here. Our interest rightly begins just after your race exploded the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. It was at that alarming time we sent our flying machines, the Flugerods, to your surface world to investigate what your race had done. That is, of course, past history now, my dear Admiral, but I must continue on. You see, we have never interfered before in your race's wars and barbarity, but now we must, for you have learned to tamper with a certain power that is not for man, namely, that of atomic energy. Our emissaries have already delivered messages to the powers of your world, and yet they do not heed. Now you have been chosen to be witness here that our world does exist. You see, our culture and science is many thousands of years beyond your race, Admiral. I interrupted, but what does this have to do with me, sir? The Master's eyes seemed to penetrate deeply into my mind, and after studying me for a few moments, he replied, Your race has now reached the point of no return, for there are those among you who would destroy your very world, rather than relinquish their power as they know it. I nodded, and the Master continued. In 1945 and afterward, we tried to contact your race, but our efforts were met with hostility. Our Flugerods were fired upon, yes, even pursued with malice and animosity by your fighter planes. So, now I say to you, my son, there is a great storm gathering in your world, a black fury that will not spend itself for many years. There will be no answer in your arms. There will be no safety in your science. It may rage on until every flower of your culture is trampled, and all human things are leveled in vast chaos. Your recent war was only a prelude of what is yet to come for your race. We here see it more clearly with each hour. Do you say I'm mistaken? No, I answer. It happened once before. The Dark Ages came and they lasted for more than 500 years. Yes, my son, replied the Master. The Dark Ages that will come now for your race will cover the earth like a pall. But I believe that some of your race will live through the storm. Beyond that, I cannot say. We see at a great distance a new world stirring from the ruins of your race, seeking its lost and legendary treasures. And they will be here, my son, safe in our keeping. When that time arrives, we shall come forward again to help revive your culture and your race. Perhaps by then you will have learned the futility of war and its strife, and after that time, certain of your culture and science will be returned for your race to begin anew. You, my son, are to return to the surface world with this message. With these closing words, our meeting seemed at an end. I stood for a moment as in a dream, but yet I knew this was reality, and for some strange reason I bowed slightly, either out of respect or humility. I do not know which. Suddenly I was again aware that the two beautiful hosts who had brought me here were again at my side. This way, Admiral, motioned one. I turned once more before leaving and looked back toward the Master. A gentle smile was etched on his delicate and ancient face. Farewell, my son, he spoke. Then he gestured with a lovely, slender hand motion of peace, and our meeting was truly ended.
My opinion on the Admiral Byrd story is, a lot of times when I look at these stories that seem extreme or they seem really sensational on the surface, for me, I like to look at how the physics of something would work, and if the person who may not have a background in physics, how they explain it. So when I read Admiral Byrd's description of things that he saw and how it felt going into this abyss type of opening, for me, it's more plausible that he was describing what he actually saw rather than making it up. And the reason is because his descriptions, I don't know that he would have been able to make it up in the way that he did with the background that he had. Now, I'm sure, I mean, he was a pilot. I'm sure he had some scientific background. But it also was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot about quantum physics since then. We've learned a lot about how these types of things would work. And there are too many descriptions in there of things that he saw that line up with current quantum physics understanding. And I kind of look at accounts like the book of Ezekiel in the same way. Ezekiel, in his vision, first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, he sees these angels that are all melded together. And what that is now referred to as extra-dimensional unfolding. And it's a way of taking, it's a hypothetical way of taking an extra-dimensional object and making it perceptible to us. There's no way anyone's going to convince me that Ezekiel, 2,600 years ago, knew enough about quantum physics to make up a story like that. He described exactly what he saw, and we're only now beginning to understand it. So going back to Admiral Byrd, there are certain details of that story that, for me, I think he would have had to know a lot more than he would have had access to at the time for it to just be made up. So when I originally read that and looked into it, that was my impression. Now, that's just a personal opinion. I could be totally wrong. He might have made the whole thing up. But my feeling is that he described exactly what he saw to the best of his ability.
The contents of Admiral Byrd's diary are some of the most incredible things I've ever read in my life. Many people can't wrap their heads around it as truth, but we have to remember the power that Satan has in this realm. This reminds me of a passage in the Gospels where the devil tempts Jesus with some pretty strange accounts. Let me take you to Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. Again, the devil taketh him, Jesus, up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them. And saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. When Satan took the Lord Jesus Christ up onto an extremely high mountain, and he showed him the kingdoms of the world in just a moment of time, he did just that. He was able somehow to present a vision, if you will, with unthinkable, massive earthly attractions, all in a brief moment of time. You see, Satan has certain powers that we don't understand. There are certain things going on in this biblical account that absolutely defy human logic, but the existence of them can't be denied. Somehow, Satan was able to project only what can be explained as an extra-dimensional display of all the kingdoms of this world in a moment of time. Now, that's not physically possible, but it's spiritually possible in the spiritual realm, which surrounds us constantly. When we come across these strange or paranormal phenomena, the easiest thing to do is deny it. But my encouragement has always been to be like the Bereans and to compare things with Scripture. And this biblical account is the closest contextual comparison in Scripture that I can even begin to try and make here when studying Admiral Byrd's account and the hollow earth, and quite possibly his account in Shambhala, sitting right before the inner earth king, which was likely Satan himself. Admiral Byrd was not only involved in expeditions to the North and South Poles, but he had some pretty action-packed encounters throughout his career with the U.S. government. And many believe he was assassinated towards the end of his life in order to silence him from sharing any more of his supernatural encounters from beyond the poles. It's worthy to note that roughly 10 years after Operation High Jump had ended, the United States has maintained a year-round presence in Antarctica, officially since 1957, and there's quite a bit of government and elite activity going on there currently.
right now, the majority of the world's most, what would you say, powerful people in the religious and the economic realm, they're all meeting in Antarctica. I submit to you that no one has ever considered that the Antichrist would be a pre-existent entity. And obviously, when you read Admiral Byrd's diary, and isn't it fascinating? You go to the King of the Earth, and he's got a swastika. That's not because, you know, he was a fan of the Nazis. The swastika is one of the oldest symbols in the history of the world. And so we've got now massive amounts of legends. We've got massive amounts of eyewitness testimony. The British sent an SAS, Special Air Services group down there, and basically they're on record. All of them were destroyed except one, and the only survivor said they encountered what we would call a Yeti, abominable snowman, but that those entities were under somebody's control.
Now, closing thoughts on Operation High Jump. If the Nazis were operating with advanced weaponry and craft technology in the Hollow Earth base in the Arctic, one has to wonder where they got these technologies.